Hello, my name is Mahon McCann. I'm a philosophy PhD researcher and part-time lecturer in philosophy and ethics. This is part 5 of the lecture series on Plato's Republic. I recommend checking out the earlier videos if you haven't seen them yet. I'll include them in the description. This lecture is going to be on Book 5 of the Republic, but particularly on philosopher kings. Plato's suggestion that kings should be philosophers and philosophers should be kings. So let's jump in. Book 5 of the Republic has some of Plato's best insights and also some of his worst. It is generally a book that most people are like, what the hell is going on? What's up with the abolition of the family, the sexual communism? A lot of strange ideas in the so-called three waves. We won't look at the three waves in any detail. I mean, the first one concerns the role of women in the Republic. Sometimes people say Plato is quite progressive on this in terms of he accepts that women can be rulers and can be warriors and that they must be educated the same as the men. But obviously the Greeks have their own ideas about things. But we're going to skip the first two waves to really the third wave, which is the most relevant, I think, and the one that is most significant, which is Plato's idea of philosopher kings. In Book 5 of the Republic, we reach the third wave. Glaucon talks about all of this stuff around the city, all this stuff they've talked about. He says that's all great, but is any of it even possible? I mean, could you do any of this in reality? Would you even want to? Socrates says essentially that they've been making a theoretical model of a good city, like a comparative standard that's not meant to be realized in reality, but that can help them like a measuring stick to judge what a good city is and a bad city. But now there's a change, there's a move here, which is that we stop talking about theory, and Glaucon, as he suggests to Socrates, is like, what can we actually do in practice? What's the thing we should actually change? And this brings up again the difference between appearance and reality that's so central to the Republic. What should we do in theory and what should we actually employ in practice? And this is where Plato makes his famous suggestion, which is that unless either philosophers become kings in our states or those whom we now call our kings and rulers become philosophers, there can be no cessation of troubles, dear Glaucon, for our states, nor I fancy for the human race either. This is very interesting. This is the first time in the Republic that philosophy comes up as a specific subject. This marks a real change from the politics, which is setting up the city, how should the city work, which ultimately fails and is like, well, we can't do this actually in reality. So then he turns to the subject of philosophy. And this is where in Book 5, Book 6, Book 7, we'll really deal with Plato's philosophy, his ontology, his epistemology. And so when politics fails here, we turn to philosophy, philosophia, the love of wisdom. And importantly, the love is primary. So we need to dig into this idea because why should philosophers be kings and why should kings be philosophers? In other words, what does it mean to be a philosopher? So it's important to specify here that in philosophy, the love is primary. It's the love of wisdom. And obviously he distinguishes from other types of lovers of social success, of glory, of honor, lovers of pleasure. The lover of wisdom is a particular type of person, a type of character. Socrates starts to explore what this philosopher king looks like. He says in 474d, if it's rightly said that someone loves something, then he mustn't love one part of it and not another, but he must love all of it. So philosophy is love of the whole and not a mere part. The whole of reality, not the appearance of reality. The philosopher loves wisdom and learning, cares about the truth profoundly. Socrates, of course, is the living embodiment of this, saying at his trial, the unexamined life is not worth living, sacrificing his life, becoming a kind of philosophical martyr. I'm reminded of the quote by Iris Murdoch that love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real. Plato is linking love and reality here, that it's not possible to love the whole of things that are fake. So essentially all appearances are parts of reality. They're images, sections of reality. And while you love them, you don't love the whole. So you're not a philosopher king. He provides the example of lovers of sights and sounds, aesthetics, kind of pleasure seekers. Glaucon challenges Socrates. Are the lovers of sights and sounds not philosophers then? And Socrates says they are like philosophers. There is the sensible appearances of things and then the thing in itself. He's separating sense experience from forms, which we're going to discuss. The appearance is a likeness. It's an aspect or a part of the whole. But the aspect is not the whole. And love desires the whole of the thing. So philosophers are true lovers of truth because they love the whole of the thing rather than just the aspect. The lover of sights and sounds only loves the aspect. They love the image, not the whole. And this raises an important conversation really about Plato's account of reality. What are these parts he's talking about? What are these appearances? And this is really what we're going to dwell on for chapter 5, 6, and 7. For Plato, a thing, an object, is not what something ultimately is. He's not a materialist. A thing is a combination of matter and form. The form is like the structural functional organization of the thing that makes sense of it. Like this cup. This cup is made of matter, but then it also is a cup for drinking. I understand what this is based on this kind of universal category that informs the matter into a shape that I can understand, that's intelligible to me. And it's important to note that for Plato, forms aren't just ideas in our head, okay? Or shapes, they are objective realities that are not physical in a sense, but that they help us grasp what physical things are. So in that sense, the form is realer than the matter for Plato, because the form is the source of intelligibility, the source of our understanding. If a thing doesn't have a form, I can't grasp it as a thing. You'll see this with Greek mythological characters, like a monster like the Minotaur. Its form is part man and part bull. It's this intercategorical thing that's hard to grasp because it doesn't have a single unified form. And if you'll remember, the Republic is searching for the form of justice. A lot of Platonic dialogues are searching for the form of the thing, because that's what it really is. It's like the essence of the thing. So once you grasp the form, you really understand what it is. The world of the forms is the stock of real and intelligible patterns in the world that make sense of our sense experience. There's this idea of the logos, that reality has an order that's intelligible so we can understand it. And the forms are part of this logos. They give an order to things that we can grasp. And without them, there's no intelligibility. There's no understanding. So we return to the example of the lover of sights and sounds. A person who has no experience beyond their sense experience has no ability to distinguish between how things really are and how they appear to be in perception. Plato likens these people to people in a dream. We only know a dream is a dream by waking up and saying, oh yeah, that's less real than what's going on now since I've woken up. And so for Plato, people, when they're locked into their sense experience, when you just think, everything here, your attentional umwelt just is reality. That's all there is. There's no other construction going on beyond it. This is all real. Plato likens those people as people living in a dream. They love beautiful women, they love beautiful sunsets, beautiful dogs. They're chasing after all these salient things, but they don't recognize that there's something common to all of those things, the beautiful itself. They can't grasp the beautiful itself, and so they can't see the connection between all of those things that actually make them beautiful in the first place. And in that sense, they don't actually understand what they're seeing. They're just called to it. But once the aesthetic grasps and loves the form of the beautiful itself, they're freed from the kind of endless salience chasing of the beautiful things, and hence see more deeply into reality. This is why for Plato to say the form of the beautiful is realer than any particular beautiful thing, because what is common to all of those beautiful things is the form. It's what allows us to recognize something as beautiful. We can use a slightly lower brow example of a chair. So like a throne and my office chair are both chairs, but they look completely different. They have totally different material, totally different sizes, but I can recognize both of them as a chair. And that's because they share in the same form. And the form of a chair isn't just in my head. If I die, chairs don't disappear. The form of a chair still exists. And in some sense, it exists outside of time and space, because people 2,000 years ago, or in Plato's time, knew about chairs as well. And nobody from then is around now, but we can still grasp the form of a chair. Another example of that would be circle. I can draw a circle in this fashion, and it can be a bit dodgy and not a perfect circle, but you understand that it's a circle because you have grasped the model of a perfect circle that makes sense of these geometrical patterns. A child could draw a house in a crude stick figure way, but we know it's a house because we grasp the form of a house. What happened to Plato's forms? Why is this so controversial in the modern world. A lot of people simply deny their existence. And that's because we live in a world of materialism, really reductionist materialism, and particularly nominalism. So nominalism is the philosophical position that only particulars are real. So like this cup is real, but there's no universal category of cup that's real. It's just a name or a category that is a useful convenience, but it doesn't have a reality in and of itself. For Plato, actually, the form is realer than the particular because it's through the form that the particular becomes intelligible to us. It's only through the form of a cup that I can recognize this as a cup. If I had a stroke or some kind of brain injury that stopped me from recognizing cups, I wouldn't know what a cup is. I wouldn't understand the form of a cup. And so there wouldn't even be particular cups in that sense. And this is why I think Plato is right. But in a materialist paradigm, materialist nominalist paradigm, what's ultimately real is just what's physical. So abstract forms aren't real. They're not causally significant. Whereas for Plato, he has this top-down causality, which is the source of our intelligibility that forms provide for us. I think ultimately Plato has been validated by the latest cognitive science as well, particularly predictive processing, which is like the best model of perception and action available, which is that our top-down knowledge filters our sense perception. We don't just have passive sense perception of the world coming in, which is just far too much for us to ever possibly deal with. And it's also a lot of it not relevant. So essentially our top-down knowledge screens out a lot of irrelevant information. And what we pay attention to really is the difference between that top-down knowledge or predictions and the sensory input when they don't match one another. When there's a problem with our modeling, we pay attention to sensory information in order to update the model to get a better grasp, or we take action to change the environment more in alignment with our modeling. But this is deeply Platonic. I mean, Kant is pretty similar in a sense that his Copernican revolution was that our top-down cognition is shaping our perception, not the other way around. Okay, we don't just have passive, unfiltered access to reality through our senses, which is really the basis of a materialist worldview. It has to be what you see is what you get. But for Plato and for Kant and for predictive processing, the brain is in our head. It's not, and in our body. It's not out there in the world. We are getting stuff in, but it's not passive access to unfiltered reality through this. So then we come to Plato's theory of knowledge, his epistemology. Plato argues that knowledge is of reality, what is, being. Opinion is just knowledge of appearances. It's not even really knowledge. Their images or likenesses are in between. And ignorance is an illusion. It's thinking you have knowledge of something that's real that actually isn't real. It's non-being. Okay. And for Plato, obviously, let's say the aesthetic who's wowed by the particulars of things that are salient, they're locked into that reality. They're mistaking appearances for reality because they don't know the form that's common to the particulars. So therefore, they're not seeing what's really real. They're taking appearances. So they live in a world of opinion and not true knowledge, like the people who live in the cave. And so for Plato, you have to go on this journey, the aligning of the tripartite psyche, creating of inner harmony and justice in order to see through the appearances into reality, to see through the images. And Plato critiques images a lot, but then also he makes use of images as a way of getting to reality, as a way of getting to the forms. And this is very central to his entire project, really. Okay, so now we can return to the philosopher king. So why should kings be philosophers and why should philosophers be kings? Philosophy is the love of wisdom, but the philosopher, that love is love of the whole. So searches for the most comprehensive whole of reality. Doesn't become stuck on the particulars, but instead travels up the hierarchy of the forms to the form of the good itself. In that sense, philosophy is not a subject, it's a way of life. It's an ethic, it's an ethos. And this is why philosophers should be kings, because they know the forms, so they know what's real. They know reality. Whereas non-philosophers don't know reality. They live in a world of opinion and worse, of a world of ignorance. The philosopher can tell the difference between the forms and the appearances, and hence discern real justice from fake justice, wisdom from foolishness, etc. So that's why the rulers of the city must be philosopher kings, because their good judgment, their wisdom is dependent on knowing the forms and being able to separate them from the appearances.